and Mayor Watson. We still will have two vacancies on the board of directors, and we're asking for you to delegate to the board the ability to fill those vacancies and confirm those terms in accordance with the terms that were originally proposed. And I think that's a one-year term and a 2-year term. And finally, to appoint Welsh and Company as our public accountant for the ensuing year and authorize us to fix the remuneration that are paid to the public accountant. We don't have audited statements because we are here quite in advance of a year of operation, and so we don't have audited statements to provide to you. We did provide in our documentation that was distributed to you a financial statement that brought you to the end of, almost the end of May, that gives you an idea of where we are, and the executive director will cover that when we talk about our broader presentation. But we'll be back in June 2019 with audited financial statements for you to review. So, Mr. Mayor, the first order of business at the meeting of the members would be to approve, ask questions, of course, and then to approve the administrative items, those being items 2 to 7 listed on your agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Hume. So we have items. I think we can bulk them together unless people have specific questions. I guess Councillor Deans, will you and Councillor Harder move items 2 to 7 administrative items as requested by the MSC? Carried.
Question.
Sorry, Councillor Deans has a question on one of the items.
Just wondering what caused the 4 resignations.
I think it's 2 pieces. A number of directors said it was workload related. And I agree, there was, this is a startup business, really, and the workload necessary to establish the corporation, to call for things like tenders, to write policy, really, was not in keeping with what some of the members thought that their workload was going to be. So, they advised that this was not in keeping with what they felt that they could contribute to the corporation, and as a result, they declined some of them very early on to be part of the organization. I also think that when our next presentation comes forward, you'll see that there's a fairly significant element of risk in this endeavor. And when you start to take a look at the workload and the risk involved, I think Chantal Gingras said it clearly that this was going to be a lot of work, and it had a high likelihood to fail, and she wasn't interested in being involved in that. And that was her take early on. I think what you'll hear from us is we've stabilized the organization, and we have a path forward that I think will be successful. And so I think we're over that hump. So I don't think you should see. You may see workload becoming an issue, but the people that are here or that are recommended, and the people that will come forward, will understand that there's more of a workload than being on a governance board, for example.
So I guess just 2 follow-up questions. One, presumably you're carrying insurance for directors, risk insurance?
Absolutely. And
secondly, are you remunerating the members of the board?
Absolutely not.
No.
We're all volunteers.
Okay.
I'm not even sure we pay your parking, but we might. So there's no remuneration whatsoever.
Should.
We're a very lean organization.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Deans. On items 2 to 7, Councillor Kakish, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And some of the local businesses came to me in the past year with some concerns as we transitioned into this model. And I think Shannon Kenny was the lead, and she had said, let's give them time to get set up and get up and going. But a lot of them did have concerns and lack of clarity in terms of their rents, and some of them had invested in various renovations and that sort of thing, and they weren't really getting a clear message or communication. So I'm just wondering if you can provide an update on that in terms of where things are.
Sorry, that can come up during the presentations. This is just on the administrative matters right now. So did you have anything on questions 2 to 7, points 2 to 7?
No, just that question.
Okay, so we'll put you back on the list for after the presentation by the Executive Director. Councillor Leeper on items 2 to 7, please.
Thank you, Chair. The bylaw is fairly straightforward with respect to how the organization is going to be governed. I'm just wondering if you can give us an idea, where is the community in all that bylaw? How do you anticipate consultation with the community stakeholders with whom you'll be partnering and working and affecting? And I'm thinking particularly here, of course, of Parkdale Market. Is there a role for them in the bylaw?
I think the role for all of the stakeholders is within our strategic planning process, and how the individual exercises under that planning process roll out. The bylaw really governs how we will interact with our members, which are you folks. External members are really dealt with our external policies and within our strategic planning process, how we engage them, why we engage them, what we really look for from them. Where the path that we're looking at taking is going to involve a significant amount of I'm not going to say it's consultation, I'm going to say it's engagement. We need to change policies and the regulatory environment. We're going to talk about that. And in order to do that, we're going to have to involve our stakeholders if we're going to be successful. In fact, we've gone out and talked to our outside of a bylaw, we've been out and we've talked to the BIA in your area. I know that the Executive Director's been out to the Community Association. I spoke to the Community Association in Councillor Fleury's ward and to a representative of the BIA to discuss those matters. We believe that's where the fundamental consultation should be focused on, around implementing our official plan.
So the bylaw doesn't identify community stakeholders as having a particular consultation role that is protected by the bylaw. You've done a great job thus far of reaching out, and I appreciate it, Jeff, especially in dealing with our stakeholders. What is our opportunity as members to influence or to weigh in on the success of those relationships?
Well, we have an annual. Your ultimate ability is you can dismiss the board.
Right.
If you are unhappy with how the board is conducting consultations, you are fully within your right to dismiss them. So that's the ultimate power that you hold. You also hold, of course, the power of suasion, much more than anybody else would, I think, as being members. We have an annual meeting of our. We will have an annual meeting of our members. So, if you're unhappy, you can voice it then, and if you continue to be unhappy, you can dismiss the board.
I don't think we're heading down that path, obviously, but thank you for the engagement that you've had with the community in Hintonburg thus far, and I'm looking forward to continuing working with you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Leeper. So on items 2 to 7 as presented, carried. Presentation, how long is the presentation, Mr. Chair?
It's about 15 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
So about 10 minutes, okay.
10,
great.
okay.
No.
So, first of all, we want to apologize to the members. We're in the middle of translation for the presentation. So it will be available, both it and the strategic plan, in both French and English shortly after the conclusion of this meeting. And I don't know where it goes, but I'm sure it's coming up. But we can move past.
Just have the Deputy Clerk put it on the screen, please. While we're waiting, I think every member of council has a copy, and we'll get it up on the screen for members of the public.
So just let me go to the competitive context for you right now, and we're not going to sugarcoat this for you. The competition continues to erode our market share. There's no question that the plethora of farmers markets, whether that be in the suburban areas or whether at the corner of, whether it's Foster's Family Farms, who are on the corner of Alta Vista and Cunningham, it is a very highly competitive environment. We've inherited some very difficult infrastructure, whether that be the buildings or things like public washrooms. They're very, and I will tell you, managing public washrooms in a public environment like the Byward Market is an incredibly difficult prospect, and we really require new public outdoor washrooms. And we want to tell you that to the members that, and we'll be coming to City Council during the new term to talk about the priorities for new physical infrastructure in our market areas to create the right market environment. We have our current regulation is stifling. It is difficult to manage with. Let me give you an example. We have a beautiful heritage building. We have some office space. We would like to lease. It's not particularly good rental space, but it's good office space. The zoning bylaw doesn't allow us to do that. So we have to find a way to change, and we will be undertaking a change in consultation with our community partners to that area. So I'll leave the competitive context and I'll turn it over to the financial context to Mr. Darwin.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're down on slide 5, the financial context, and I should say it's a new surprise every day in terms of unpeeling the onion and having a look at what has transpired, and that is because the city, of course, was a very large organization, and a lot of the costs and so on were commingled as it relates to the market specifically. But I should tell you, by cutting a substantial portion of the expenses from the 2018 budget that was proposed by city staff to FEDCO in 2017, the MSC has reached short-term stability in financial operations. Furthermore, after nearly 6 months of operations, the MSC projects it will deliver a balanced budget of $1.2 million for 2018. So for going forward beyond this year, which I consider stable or in line, we will use our revenues from our indoor operations to support our outdoor operations, including the Parkdale Market. Additional revenue opportunities as they present themselves will further support our outdoor public spaces and our food mandate.
You also had in your package an outline of our first 4 or 5 months of operations, and you can see where we are on our budget and our year-to-date. So if we can move now to item number 6, we can talk a little bit about the retail environment and our hard assets.
Okay. After our targeted leasing initiatives, we've achieved an occupancy rate of 99% by securing 53% of expected vacancies in 2018. We have implemented a daily on-site property manager to ensure tenant relations and building compliance. Subsequent to our life safety building audits, full-time security was implemented and preparation for our capital and life cycle construction programs have begun. So,
and we'll come back. Do you want to address Councillor Kakash's question now through, or maybe we can come back to that at the end, Mr. Mayor? It's up to you.
It's your choice.
Okay.
Would you like to re-propose the question? Apologies. I want to make sure I'm answering it correctly.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So we just want to I'll turn it over to Mr. McClarty to walk you through just very quickly the first, the context of our strategic plan and the strategic plan process. MNP was assisting us in creating the plan. Along with Mr. McClarty was Tim Camiso, former city manager of Thunder Bay. So we had someone who had a real good understanding of the municipal works, and so it was what we believe quite a successful endeavor on our part. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your slide up there is the strategic plan context. You can see in the slide that we started the process by reviewing a number of prior reports and studies, all of which were very helpful in providing us foundation to get the strategic planning process started. One of the reports, of course, was the recommendation that a municipal services corporation be utilized, which is in fact the case. With respect to your question, Councillor Leeper, we did receive detailed stakeholder input from most of the BIAs and the interested parties, and that was all fed into the process and summarized and discussed at the strategic planning sessions. With respect to the next slide, the strategic planning process, you have a copy of the detailed strategic plan in your package, but you'll note it's for the years 2018 to 2022. We did, as Peter suggested, have a number of workshops. I think it was 4 in total with the board. We believe the plan itself is designed to be flexible and can be updated as we run up against additional internal and external factors. It is a 10-year plan, and it is a transformative plan in the sense that you'll see that we talk about redefining the Byward market as a precinct, and Peter will talk more to that, as well as a different concept for the Parkdale market as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McClarty. If we could move to and you all, I'm sure, are aware of our organizational framework, and our commitment were defined by City Council, and we use that as the springboard to our strategic directions. So our key strategic directions for the coming term relate in 3 broad categories: fast-tracking new market regulations, delivering a dynamic market experience, and transforming Ottawa markets. And when we say fast-tracking new market regulations, we really need to take advantage of take advantage of the assets we have, the hard assets that we have, and provide some flexibility in being able to utilize those assets. And when I mean the zoning on our buildings is incredibly restrictive. Food uses and retail restricted to arts and crafts are the only uses you can have in the building. And we know that a dynamic market has a variety of uses and a variety of anchors, and we need some flexibility in terms of what we can place in that market building, and that's critically important. I don't want to sugarcoat that, because the revenue that's derived from the indoor vending supports the open air markets. So money will be this year flowing from the retail operations in the Byward market to support the Parkdale market and to support the open air vending in and around the Byward market. So we need to do that. We also need to have some flexibility with respect to our operating bylaws in our open air vending that give us more flexibility to introduce for people, and that's very critical in our open air vending, because as I said at the beginning, we have a declining market share, and in some cases we're reaching a critical point. You need to have a variety of vending in and around the area of 40 stalls. In 40 stalls. And so we need to stop the decline, and we need to invest in infrastructure and to ensure that we can start to grow that so that we maintain the critical mass in those market areas. And one of the ways to do that is to provide more flexibility for us to work with artisans, to bring in microprocessors, to provide the abilities for these places to become even greater destinations than they are today. So the second thing, the second key strategic outcome is delivering a dynamic market experience. It's become readily apparent to us that the market and markets, and both of our markets, don't start at the outdoor vending stands. They actually start quite a distance away. It's not just focused around the market building. It's when you enter York Street or you walk into the Byward Market. So we really have to start thinking about our markets as an experience, as an area, as a district, and we're calling it a precinct. In creating those precincts, using the revenues that are generated in those precincts to invest in both the indoor and the outdoor infrastructure, so that we create a stronger destination in those areas. And whether it's making sure that all the public spaces work together, or simply having a place to go to the bathroom in terms of the Byward Market, those are key pieces of the market puzzle. And the last thing is really an amalgam of the first two and some of our other activities, which is to really be focused on transforming both of our spaces to a state where we've got good, solid plans in place. We've got solid retailers that are generating revenue that we are using to invest in our outdoor vending. We've got solid infrastructure like fully accessible public washrooms. It's another thing. We're the only public washrooms in the Byward Market, but if you have a young family, they're not accessible. If you have a young family, you're not getting your stroller up to the top of the stairs to go to use the washroom. So, we not only have to try and retrofit accessible, appropriate washrooms into our physical building, we have to find a way to bring those outside, because that's, we know, is part of the experience that people expect when they come to a fully integrated public market experience. So, Mr. Mayor, those are our three strategic directives that flow from our plan and some of the things that we hope to do. A number of these...
Councillor, Chair Hume, if I could just... We have a number of people who have questions on those three items, so maybe if we can go back to Councillor Kakish's, if you could just repeat your question, this would be the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. So again, the question was with regards to communication and with regards to the changes that the local businesses are facing, and it seems like there's uncertainty with what's in for them in terms of the future and what you're asking from them. So I've heard things like you're doubling their common fees, you're taking a percentage of their rents. And I appreciate that you have a mandate here in authority, but I think, I don't think your authority is to be ruthless with businesses that have been there for many years and implementing these kind of tough regulations on them. So if you can talk a bit about that and where those negotiations are at.
Get the staff mic.
There we go. I can absolutely address each one of those. So I will say that when we first came on, the tenants were absolutely terrified. They didn't know what situation was going to unfold. So we took an initiative to sit down with each individual tenant and explain that their tenancies are actually solidified. They were under the impression that as soon as we walked in, their leases were to be null and void. That is not the case, legally or on the ground. So we sat down with each one of them, explaining the situation to calm it. As far as operating costs go, we actually maintained their operating costs at the level that they were currently paying. And we did so by the MSC actually having to pick up a portion of the operating costs themselves, a large portion, so that the tenants could sustain the rents that they were currently at. We understand that the market right now is a hard place to be. Tourism is down in the winter months, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't putting them in a situation where we were closing their doors as the first thing as we walk through. So a lot of the things that people were complaining about in the beginning actually never transpired. We worked very hard to ensure that they could maintain their businesses as they currently sit. And every day we're working with them to ensure that when there's issues with security or costs increase, we've actually worked with them to net effective their rents, which would mean that we would suck up a lot more of the costs ourselves to ensure that it wouldn't affect them on their day-to-day operations.
Thank you, Councillor Kakish. Just a reminder, Councillor, we did create this Municipal Service Corporation so we don't micromanage the market. And if constituents are contacting you because they feel they're paying too much rent or whatever, they should be directed to the market's manager, really, because we're not going to go back to the days where Councillor Fleury and Councillor Leeper were sort of the ward healers trying to solve all the problems. So, I would strongly suggest if someone has a specific concern, they address it to the market.
I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor, but they've come to me because they felt that they weren't getting the responses or the communications that they needed. So I just want to clarify that that work is being followed. And I just have a quick follow-up on that. So they're saying that they're doubling common area expenses, increasing rents for businesses, and taking a percentage in rent. You're saying that's not happening?
The operating costs are exactly what they were paying last year. The percentage rents were actually in their leases at the time, and we sustained that across any renewals. Nothing was changed.
Okay. And for how long will you be doing that?
For the term of their lease. They were in leases, which actually stipulated percentage rents. And we just simply carried on the renewals, which in leasing capacity would be
So, but when those leases are up, you will be doing those things. You will be jacking everything up and taking
It's what was inherited. So we have carried that forward. We haven't changed anything.
But when the leases are up?
When the leases are up, that would come at the time when that'd be part of the strategic plan, I would imagine.
I just think I appreciate that we're delegating this to this body, but I think you need to be a bit, more collaborative based on the feedback I've heard. And we're not setting this committee up to be ruthless and shut down businesses that have been there for a long time. So I think you need to take that into consideration as well. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, just if there's one thing I can add, just so you're aware that we solidified the leases that are currently there to alleviate what was on the street. So we did, I believe we secured 53%. So we essentially took the tenancies that were there and we ensured that they were in place as they stood for the foreseeable future to alleviate this.
Thank you. Councillor Cloutier, please, has a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. When we're talking about the life cycle maintenance for hard assets that are required, the hard assets are primarily the market building?
Yes.
55 Byward and 70 George, the retail spaces in 70 George.
Can you tell me where the $2.5 million comes from? Is that a recent engineering study or assessment?
Yes, that figure comes from two studies that were done. One study done by the city themselves upon turnover, and another review done by a life safety review done by us. And so that figure is an amalgam of the recommendations from those two studies, as vetted by us, I think. But
okay, and you also state the infrastructure repair and maintenance is beyond the financial capacity of the corporation, and the assets are owned by the city. should we expect that there will be a request in the next budget for funds?
So when we accepted, or when we became established, we understood that the city was allocating resources through their capital budget process. So yes, we expect there'll be a life cycle maintenance allocation in your budgets going forward. But some of the more critical pieces of infrastructure, for example, outdoor washrooms, things like the results of the public realm study that's currently underway aren't in your budget, and we're saying to you that we believe that those type of pieces of infrastructure are critical to the future of the market, and we're talking to you as members now. We'll be going back to the city when the new council is established to say, you know, we really believe that these need to be term of council priorities. They're expensive infrastructure investments that are beyond our capacity to manage without changing the revenue model. And we're one of the key directions that we have is the creation of a precinct, of the Byward Market precinct, that we hope over time may be able to change that revenue model to where and increase the standards that you find in the district. So, but those are plans and discussions that are to come. But right now, as it stands, could we manage the $2.5 million all on our own? No, is the answer.
Last question, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. You will be seeking change to the zoning and introducing new uses in the markets. And on the following slide, slide 12, new national brand specialty retailer tenants. You'll be consulting with the current retailers as to how that can be integrated with the
first thing
competitiveness of the market.
The first thing that I'll tell you, Councillor, is that the current tenancies, the majority of the current tenancies are in place till the end of 2019. What happens, or what kind of retailer we're able to achieve, we think we would like to create a national retailer as to focus, to create more of a focus as a destination. However, the zoning doesn't allow that. So we'll be consulting with our friends at the BIA and the Lower Town Community Association about what uses are appropriate in that building, and hopefully with some professional advice that we'll get, we'll report to Planning Committee on what we expect, what we think the zoning should be, and at that time we would hopefully have everyone in alignment as to what it would be. But there's clear from the board that we believe that a stronger anchor presence that would solidify our revenues out of the Byward Market building would be beneficial to the ability for us to invest in our outdoor markets. So whether that comes to pass or not is the next step we need to take.
Thank you, and thank you to the board, for the volunteer board, for your work on this important part of our city.
Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to you, Peter, and to your colleagues for the work that you're doing in the Byward Market. I think there is no doubt that we need a healthy Byward Market. It's an anchor for our whole city, and it's a magnet for tourism and for many other things. So it's important, the work that you're doing for us, and we appreciate it. You mentioned changing the retail mix, and I've been around here for a while, as have you, and we've seen lots of iterations of that in the Byward Market in the past. And at one time we got away from locally grown produce, and I mean, I for one am not going to the Byward Market to buy plastic strawberries. So I'm just wondering, when you talk about changing the retail mix, I think it's important that it be, you know, produce. So what are you talking about in terms of what you're thinking?
Well, there's two, I guess. When we talk about updated retail mix strategy, we need to talk in two ways. First of all, there's the hard assets where we're renting retail space to people. Right now, if you were to go into our building, the uses don't comply with the zoning bylaw, first of all. There's a dominance of restaurant uses, and we think we need to get away from that. In the outdoor vending market, what we really need to when you look at the markets around the world, there's always there's a prepared food section, there's the fruits and vegetables sections, and then there's the artisan section. And I think what we're talking about is trying to transition away, at least in a couple of areas, to a more farm-based product mix. And we need to do that carefully, and that needs some consideration. But you can't have, in prime growing season, my friend here growing cucumbers at his farm, and me going to the food terminal and buying it from the food terminal and setting up stands next to each other, only to have me undercut the farmer. And what that does is that drives your farming community away from your public market. And what you really want to do is be very careful in that mix, because you want your farming community to be your public market. So you need a good, strong policies about local produce in season. You need to ensure that there are low barriers to entry in those markets, so that you've got so a farmer or an artisan, someone who's, I always remind you, remember Brian Coburn, he used to make trains, right? In his workshop, and he made these toy trains, and he'd give them away. That's a type of artisan you want in your Byward market, selling those artisans along York Street. You want to transition away from the purchase in bulk from overseas to the market. And so that's what we're starting to think about, how we need to change our mix. We need to be very careful with it, but we really want to focus on local food, local artisans, local micro processors, but we have to recognize that in a 365-day-a-year market, you're going to get people who are going to go to the food terminal when it's not in season. So that's where we have to find that very delicate balance. But certainly, we want to return to that very local farm experience in the Byward market.
I think that's a good direction. I agree it's tricky, but I think it's a good direction. You were focused on toilets. So
yes.
I just want to talk about toilets for a minute. Because I know a few years ago, I can't remember the recommendations, but the Project for Public Spaces did some work in the Byward market. And interestingly enough, many years ago, I actually did a seminar in New York City with the Project for Public Spaces, and they were focused on toilets. And in fact, they believed that having good public toilets in their areas like the Byward Market were essential. And so we actually toured some in New York City. Not many people go to New York City to see toilets, but I think I did. Anyway, they actually had attendants in the bathrooms all the time that paid for themselves because they did donations, and they had flowers in the bathrooms, and they were beautiful public spaces. And I wonder if the drive to maybe find a way to put public toilets at grade in the Byward Market is coming through that Project for Public Spaces.
So that's certainly an influence, but when we look at markets, and what we're looking at is markets and markets experience across the world. Public washrooms and washroom facilities are critical to the experience that you have, and they're almost as important as your other public spaces, whether that's a place to sit, whether that's a green space where children can play, all of that sort of wrapping experience where you say, I want to come there because, I can go here, I can sit down, I can get a coffee and watch the world go by. Try to find a bench. We're getting better in some of our places, but where you can start and watch the world go by, and I have to go to the washroom. And so out of it is coming a desire to create that experience, to create a really positive experience. And so, yes, the Project for Public Spaces did influence it, but it's more of what we see across the world. I will tell you, though, that we're prohibited by our service agreement with the City of Ottawa from charging anything for public washrooms. So in London, you paid £1 and you get a chit that you can use in the market to get your £1 back. We're not allowed to do those things. It's strictly prohibited. So what we're saying, and right now, in our public washrooms, which are upstairs, the corporation bears the cost of those washrooms, but so does the tenants in the building, and that drives operating costs, significant operating costs. In fact, we have security with stick-proof vests to manage those washrooms, and I think we're going to pay $160,000 in security for those washrooms. That's why A, it's a big cost driver for us, and B, it's a big service issue. So that's why we think
Councillor, Chair, thank you.
Term of council
we have several other people that seem to want to speak on this item. I believe Councillor Fleury.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be short. Thank you, Peter and Jeff and the entire team. I just want to begin. I think we missed the key window, which is the actual scope of the organization. The organization is in charge of all of the outdoor vending and 55 Byward and the commercial retail at the base of the city parking garage. So I think it's important for members of council. We got into the conversations of bar and nightclub, and to my understanding, unless I'm wrong, but you have no bars and nightclubs within your authority. So it's important that we don't fall into the BIA or other city responsibility. I understand there's an interest in collaboration and working on those, and that's certainly welcomed. Just for the context of today's scope, I wanted to ensure that we stay within those elements. One feedback for you, and there's a couple of colleagues that brought it up, you have a very clear mandate, and it's, I think it reflects the vision that the chair was speaking about 2 minutes ago, but I'd be careful. I know there's a public realm study that's underway that you're participating and engaged in, but on page 18, it's an appendix to that public realm, and it really, it really doesn't tie in well into the mandate. So just as a comment for you to look at. Going forward, I know that as I was directly involved when the city was overseeing the market, I think it's important as much as possible to track your conversations, to be as open as you can with the membership. We have exciting things that are happening. You are a startup, so there's a lot underway, and I think your strategic plan really speaks to some of the goals in terms of where you're heading. So I want to say as we can, I know there's a capital requirement that will come back. We talked about washrooms, the building itself, and other capital need in the area. So thank you for that and being organized. And lastly, in terms of the operations, in terms of the bylaw limitations, let's make sure that when you come back that we come as a collective so that we can once and for all release you and give you the framework as to what's needed. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. That wraps up my comments.
So thank you, Mr. Chair Hume, as well as Mr. Darwin and colleagues. We wish you the best. And we're now back in full council. Just to let you know, Councillor Hubley no longer needs to deal with item number C, so carried on number C on the bulk agenda. Carried. All right. Next is Office of the Auditor General report on audit follow-ups and related reports. Councillor Shirelli, I believe you had asked for this. This is item 5.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I think we should be doing number 4 first. There's a technical amendment by Hubley and Cloutier. Councillor Hubley, if you want to introduce the the motion for item number 4, City of Ottawa Consolidated Financial Statements. Just the change and maybe explanation as opposed to reading the whole thing.
Thank you. Therefore, be it resolved that the documents 1 and 2 be amended by the substitution of the attached documents. Mr. Mayor, we're just changing out that the city's net at long-term receivables. That's all from the project.
So technical amendment by Councillor Hubley, seconded by Councillor Cloutier. Carried. On the report as amended. Carried. So, excuse me, Councillor Chiarelli, the floor is yours for item 5.
All right. Thank you, Your Worship. Just starting back at the original audit in 2011, which was then dealt with in, I'm trying to make sure I don't say anything that's going to lead us in camera. So in 2011, that was then discussed and deferred in 2012. My first question is, I know that coming out of that were recommendations that we establish a strong contract management framework, not only for this item, but for all contracts with the city. And I know that following that, we had the Orga World situation where we passed a similar recommendation, if not the exact same words, insisting on that kind of thing. So from 2000 to 2011, we had essentially things operating without that properly in place or proper procedures to make that happen. And then from 2012 to the release of this audit, we had what appears to be the same situation, even though we had passed recommendations dealing with Orga World that should have corrected this situation, and there were recommendations moving forward out of the 2011 audit that should have dealt with the same situation. So I'm wondering, what did we do to improve up to 2011, improve things as they existed up to 2011, and what have we done since 2012 to the production of this audit? And I'm asking this of management, not the AG.
So I'll take that question, Mr. Mayor. So the city's been focusing in on improving contract management overall, not just in the area of waste management, but in our roads area, in our parks area. And so the supply branch has instituted, we already have a contract administration policy, but they've been going out and reinforcing it with staff, figuring out what kind of training has to take place, looking at our processes to see if in fact we can change our processes to make them more streamlined, a little easier to do, to encourage staff to be on top of contract administration. So it's an ongoing process. We've seen, I think, real success in a couple of areas. I would actually point out infrastructure services. I think that's an area that, if I were to look back 5 to 10 years ago, contract administration was not the best in that area, but now they are very proactive with it. They're using their vendor performance management tool to actually bring contractors who are not performing in line as early as possible so that the taxpayers can get the services that their dollars are paying for.
Okay, but chronologically, as you go through, let's leave it up to 2011. It was a disaster, but from 2011 onward, we should have seen some improvement. So all I have here in the report is that many of these issues were, quote, partially completed. Now, I don't know if that means 50 to 74% completed because we had a scale of the different levels of completion. I don't know if you're still following that scale, but if you are, that would mean 50 to 74% completed on a number of those items. Can you give us a sense of how that progress has gone from 2012 to today? When did it build? Was it left in abeyance until 2016 or 15? Or what was the progress?
Mr. Mayor, I can't give you a chronological sort of a summary of when things happened, but no, when the audits were filed and there were recommendations made around those, action started even probably before the audit was tabled. So it has been building over time. What you're getting is an assessment of just the audit areas that they've focused in on recently, but this is a corporate-wide initiative. It is not just, we're not just implementing this improved contract administration in areas that have been audited. It's for all areas in the city. So are we there yet? No. The answer definitely is not. We are not there yet. But are we working towards it? Do we have a plan to go forward? The answer is yes. If I were to say, you know, if I were to average it out across the city, where are we at with contract administration? I'd probably say we're around 75%.
Okay, but so we had 11 years from amalgamation to the 2011 audit, and then we have 6 more years. So you're talking 17 years of progress. So is most of it happening recently, or did it happen in 2012? I want to get a sense of when things started to get in motion.
Ms. Mayor, I'd have to actually look at what Councillor Chiarelli is referring to. So I'm not, are you referring to a follow-up audit, or where are you
Well,
getting?
I'm talking about the follow-up audit now, but there was original audit in 2011 that was dealt with in 2012, right? Or, sorry, it was deferred after a briefing.
Do you want to take that?
Mr. Mayor, the audit that the councillor is referring to was never actually tabled publicly, I understand. I've never seen that audit. We had started litigation at the time, and I can defer to Mr. Hughes, but I believe that that audit was picked up by Mr. Hughes and was incorporated in his assessment in the most current audit. So the recommendations that might have been there around contract management, I certainly was not aware of them, neither were the other staff, I believe.
Okay. Is he answering?
Anything else, Councillor Chiarelli?
Well, yeah, he's.
The audit that councillor's referring to, Mr. Mayor, was to be presented in camera in 2012, and the decision was taken by the committee to defer it. So that audit was never presented to the committee members, nor was it made public. And however, staff did see that audit, and staff provided responses to those recommendations, and some staff did do some work towards those issues. As most people around the table will know, there was regular questioning about when that audit would be released, but because of ongoing arbitration, which was eventually resolved in 2016, and the confidentiality requirements of that arbitration, the audit could not be released. From our point of view, when we saw some work that had been done in 2011 without it having been released, we felt that we still should complete a follow-up to that audit. And more importantly, because of the time that had passed, we felt that it was important to also do some additional work. So we did, we performed some significant additional work, and the report that we've provided to the audit committee addresses that additional work, as well as, and there are some other recommendations, and we also report back on the management's performance against those recommendations. So that, the city manager is quite correct that not only was that report not made public, it wasn't even provided in an in-camera session to the members of the audit committee.
Okay. But I remember us being given a briefing on this audit in 2012. And in the minutes of November 29th, 2012, we did pass deferring consideration of the item. But to that time, we were always told that management was on the issue of trying to fix the contract management system. And they should have been, because you're 11 years, there should have been some activity to do that. So all I was asking for is a sense of when that activity actually kicked in. Was it as of 2011, or did it just happen as a follow-up audit started?
So Mr. McDonald reminded me that the actual contract administration manual, which actually was released in 2011. So the work was started actually in 2011, and we have been working on it ever since. 2014, we started on the vendor performance management system, and we have just come to the full implementation of it in 2016.
Okay, so that was consistent with the Orga World recommendation, which was almost exactly the same.
That'd be correct.
Okay. All right, on the issue of the potential blacklisting, for want of a better term, of the contractor, can we get a sense of what the contractor's performance was on all of the other issues in which it deals with the city?
Who's it got up there now?
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, the Tomlinson Group of Companies have a number of contracts with the city and overall have a very strong record of performance.
Here, what is strong record? Strong. Okay,
Anything else, Councillor Shirelli?
Do you have a number of contracts?
Oh. Since the implementation of our vendor performance management program, they have 35 contracts that make up that overall vendor score.
Okay. And was there communication between the Auditor General and this contractor before writing the report?
Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, and it's a very simple one to answer. The Ontario Municipal Act and the City of Ottawa bylaw define the responsibilities of the Office of the Auditor General, and that is to help council hold themselves and city management responsible for the expenditure of corporate funds. And in doing that activity, we look at, in carrying out that activity, that responsibility, we look at the activities of city staff against city policies, and of course we, in doing so, have to comply with the standards for audit that are generally accepted around the world. And before we come forward with the report that you see at Audit Committee, the findings and the recommendations are vetted with city staff. And as you know, city staff was in agreement with the report and the recommendations. So the simple answer is no. We don't vet our reports with outside agencies. There's no requirement for us to, and we certainly didn't in this case. No.
Okay, and finally, as time went on, and there was allegedly improper communication between the contractor and the city, at what point was management going to advise council of this, or was this going to continue until there was an audit?
Mr. Mayor, the fact is that the audit, we knew that the audit was in progress. We were waiting, obviously, for the audit to be complete and deal with the recommendations and management practices. It was our plan, if there wasn't an audit, we would have come to council to report on the status of what's happening here because of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change intervention and discussion of the issues around the environmental remediation required there. So because the audit was in play, we were deferring to the Auditor General to work with him and his team to ensure that we were able to respond to the recommendations, and that would be the avenue to inform council of the status of that particular file.
And last question, when you dealt with, when the Auditor General stated that things were partially complete, is that following the scale that we used when I was chair, where you had little or no action at 0 to 24%, action initiated 25 to 49, partially complete 50 to 74, and substantially complete 75 to 99? Or have you ditched that and gone with something else?
Mr. Mayor, it's substantially the same.
Okay. I'm out of time, so.
Okay. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for clarifying that 2011 we did not receive an audit. We were told it was going for arbitration. My question to the city manager, and I know you attended the audit committee, and was a lot of question back and forth, and with what we hear from the auditor and from our staff, I'd like to know what action are you taking to deal with the audit report?
Mr. Mayor, perhaps this is a good opportunity to provide council, particularly those that didn't attend the audit committee, an update on where we're at with this particular file, because I think it will answer the councillor's question more fully. A couple things that council should be aware of is that the Spring Hill landfill has been closed since May 4th, 2018. They are not accepting, cannot accept any more waste to that site. Their construction and demolition landfill operation agreement expires on October 6, 2018, and we provided formal notice in January that the lease for this operation will not be extended. So in effect, the site is closed down, is not accepting any other material to that site. In terms of my involvement on this, on Monday I met with Mr. Kevin Senkmar, who's the president of Tomlinson Group of Companies, and Mr. Michael Clement, who's their general manager of landfills, I believe, which was just after the audit. And we had met before the audit was tabled also, just so you're aware. That was our second meeting. And we had quite a frank discussion, and the MOECC has accepted the city's plan to design and implement an engineer cap and stormwater plan for this site. We're in the process of dealing with the concept plan right now, creating that. And once that's done, we'll be submitting a detailed design plan to the MOECC for review and approval. Our discussion with Tomlinson moving forward, it was my judgment that we couldn't deal with the rest of the Auditor General's recommendations until we dealt with the most immediate issue, which was the environmental remediation. We all felt that it was important to deal with the immediate, most urgent matter now and get that out of the way before we could discuss the related issues, particularly the financial ones that were highlighted in Mr. Hughes' report. Tomlinson has told us that they're committed to work with the city and the ministry to finalize an approved solution for capping and stormwater management. They've agreed that they are obligated as a company to pay for the total cost for this solution, and they are not disputing the issue of cost. And I received a letter from Tomlinson Group of Companies which effectively validates that. The discussions I would characterize as collaborative and very frank. We've had some tough conversations, but they've come with an attitude of collaboration. I can tell Council, Mr. Mayor, that the city still has the leverage of imposing Section 37, which is our supplier performance clause in our procurement bylaw, banning them from bidding on city contracts. We still have the option on Section 47 of the procurement bylaw, which would exclude companies from potential specific bids if they are engaged in litigation with the city. So we still have leverage to be able to invoke if we don't get the compliance that we require. And as I said, there's a number of recommendations that we still have to deal with, particularly the financial ones that Mr. Hughes has rightly pointed out, that we need to have conversations with Tomlinson. They've agreed that they're going to continue to meet with us and discuss all the outstanding issues and recommendations related to these financial components. The executives that came to the meeting were actually quite clear that they wish to reduce or resolve the issues associated to the Spring Hill landfill and move past this. And their actions so far and their discussion in the meeting has been consistent with this attitude of let's get past this and let's resolve the outstanding issues. As Mr. McDonald stated, we have a good relationship as a city with Tomlinson on a lot of files and through many years. They're a locally grown company. They've grown and they've been very successful in the Ottawa area and beyond. This is an issue for us. They understand that. They don't want this to sully their reputation. They want to move forward. And I believe that we're going to have very good collaborative discussions moving forward on the financial arrangements.
Right, thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Kanellakis. And we heard some of those, obviously, from Thomason, who reached out to us to talk about this, and I'm glad you're following up with it, because my answer was to the company, we don't need a PR relationship, we need action plan on this, and I'm glad you are follow up with it, and I'm glad to hear the city still have an option. Actually, we have more than one option. One, to blacklist the company if they don't cooperate with us, and B, still 25% of the landfill is unused, so to speak. So, and I cannot imagine the company want to leave that alone. But what I'm looking for, or what we all need to hear from you, because in the audit report also talk about the company been reducing the fee when it comes to dumping fee through the company. Are you going to be able to hire a third party to review exactly what this company owe the taxpayer in money we believe, and if you, I'm sure you went through the audit report, to be satisfied for us as a taxpayer and as a council. This has been done by third party, and we know exactly what the company owe us on this one.
Mr. Mayor, yes, the company has sent us I don't know, about 700 pages, I guess, of financial information that our staff are currently reviewing. Ms. Simulek has advised me that they will be hiring a third-party auditor to review it. It's very complex to go through it and ensure that we are fully aware of what the expenses and revenues are, and we're able to have those discussions with Tomlinson with respect to any potential monies owed to the city per the Auditor General's recommendations.
Well, thank you for the, Mr. Kanellakis. So we don't have to wait for the next round of audit on this file. Are you going to update this council as some information become available to you? Because I heard from our staff we didn't receive. Can you guys take it easy here? So we heard from our staff you received those 700-some page of document and you didn't have the chance to review it. But up and on review it or hire a third party, are you going to come back to council with your recommendation? Because I think we need to keep on top of this one.
Well, the audit, Mr. Mayor, the audit committee has directed us to come back on any decision concerning the expansion of the landfill to phase 5, which is the last cell that needs to be filled. So we committed to do that, and we would come back to council. But I've explained to the Tomlinson executives, and I believe our staff are in agreement with it, and I've shared this with the Auditor General, that conversation with council and a recommendation by staff cannot happen until we resolve all the other outstanding recommendations that are in the Auditor General's report. We have to work through those. They're going to take some time. I know the Auditor General, I don't want to speak for him, but I think at audit committee he indicated that he will be doing a follow-up and be watching this very closely. So we will be sharing obviously everything that happens with him, and what I anticipate is that we'll be bringing back the entire package to council, because Tomlinson has indicated that they are interested in pursuing the last cell, and as the councillor mentioned, obviously for business purposes to utilize that last cell, but that can't happen until I can come back with a full package to say, here's what's happened on the revenues and all the other recommendations, for council to have everything in front of them before they make that decision.
And do you have, and maybe that's a simple question, do you have the delegated authority to hire a third party to review what's in the audit report compared to the tonnage and the fee and the tipping fee, and what exactly they owe the city in funding?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much,
Right.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and I think maybe Mr. Kanellakis, you can circulate the letter from Tomlinson, make it available to the public and the media and members of council, because I think it clearly states in there that they're taking responsibility for the remediation, and I appreciate Councillor El-Shantiri's questions and the work that Councillor Hubley has done as Chair of Audit. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I'd like to start off by thanking the Auditor General and his team for the good work on the audit. It was certainly a difficult one. It was one they did a follow-up to an audit that many of them were not even involved in the first place. So appreciate their work on it, and certainly the discussion at committee was very robust on the issue. Appreciate Mr. Kanellakis' efforts to. I'll just back up a second here. Audits are great for identifying where there's issues within how we manage things, whether it's contracts or programs, whatever at the city. To me, the key part of the audit is what are the recommendations to resolve any issues that are in there. It's been a great record this term of council that the management accepts all the findings of the audit, as they have in this case here. And even before we got it tabled, Mr. Kanellakis was working on those recommendations, trying to ensure that they were put in. So I appreciate his work on this. I do have some concerns with what Councillor Chiarelli brought up, that the original audit, I can tell you I was the vice chair at that point. I never received the audit. Councillor Centuri was a member, never received the audit. I'm wondering if the Auditor General can tell us if there's any record or numbering or anything that could tell us how many copies are out there, because this week, Mr. Mayor, a local blogger put out that they had a copy of it, and I'm wondering how that got out there without members of the committee actually seeing it, either former members or current members. So if the Auditor General could tell us his thoughts or what kind of control there is of these audits, how that could happen.
Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, I wasn't around at the time, but I know that the office protocol was similar, and that audit reports aren't distributed, especially those that are confidential to be discussed in camera. They would have been held for distribution at the audit committee once they went in camera, but as we've been told, the committee deferred the item, so that report was not wasn't distributed. I do not know. I don't know if that particular audit report that is alleged to have been seen by an individual is truly the one that was prepared by the Office of the Auditor General. I don't know where that came from, but there were no copies distributed because to the members of the audit committee because the audit committee didn't go in camera.
I wonder if Councillor Chiarelli would be willing to share his copy of the audit with the Auditor General so we can see if that is the final one, because we're trying to figure out here, like, there's claims now that myself and Councillor El-Shattiri and City Manager have been suppressing the findings of that audit when in fact we never really had it. Councillor Chiarelli is the only one that says he had it. So I'd like to have, I'd like to actually find out how that could happen, and so is that going to be the Auditor General's office, or is it going to be the clerk's office that would look into that?
Chiarelli.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did not say that I had the audit. I said we were briefed on it, and we were briefed on it. Nobody took anything, as far as I know, nobody took anything away from that briefing. So, as far as I know, no one has the audit.
Only a local blogger has a copy then.
Well, I'm not aware. So Councillor Chiarelli is indicating he doesn't have a copy. So
okay, could so the Auditor General, you're telling us, as far as you know, you've got the copy in your office. There's no way to determine if there's copies that are out there then. None. Let's put it this way: none have been tabled anywhere or distributed, to the best of your knowledge, on your watch.
None have been tabled. I was told so by my predecessor. I was told that by city staff, and we did not distribute any.
Okay. Then perhaps, Mr. Mayor, what I'll do is take that offline with the city solicitor and the Auditor General so we can follow it up.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you very much. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for the record, I don't have a copy of it either. A quick comment and then question. My comment to the city manager. First of all, thank you for the detailed information to these questions. It's very helpful. You mentioned as an option blacklisting this company. You still have tools in the tool chest to use if needed, and I just want to acknowledge this is an extreme option that you've stated that the company is working collaboratively with you in good faith and that your own staff have confirmed their work performance is solid. So we need to stress that that is an extreme option to consider, and we have to consider what's in the best interest of taxpayers, because if you eliminate a major contractor in the city from bidding, that could have upward pressure on prices. So let's just consider what's in the best interest for taxpayers. My question is regarding the closure of the landfill. You stated, Mr. City Manager, that we're looking at October. And can you just elaborate, is that strictly for environmental reasons because of the state of the impact it's having on the neighboring wetlands? Can you just confirm that that is the reason why this is going to be closed?
That is exactly the reason, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, and that's all from me.
Okay. So on the report, carried and received. Item number 11, proposed corporate greenhouse gas emissions project. Councillor Chernyshenko, as chair of the Environment Committee, please.
Lost it. There we go. Thank you very much. I just thought I would, I know this item was held and some of my colleagues had some questions around this, so I thought I would try and put some context to it. The first question, of course, is why another target? We have an 80% greenhouse gas emissions reduction target by 2050. What's different about this one? This is a proposed 20% reduction by 2024. It is both a new target and it isn't, and allow me to explain that. Essentially, if you're going to get to 80% by 2050, you need to hit some markers, guideposts along the way. We could aim for that 2050 date and not bother with shorter term targets. However, we are a member of an organization called Carbon 613, which is run through the Enviro Center. The city, along with the major organizations like, fortuitously, we just had them this morning, Hydro Ottawa, the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, IKEA, and a number of other major players in the electricity sector and consumers as well in this city are members of the organization. And essentially what it's trying to do is this is a venue for bringing together the stakeholders, where the City of Ottawa acknowledges we are the biggest player, but only one player in the energy consumption and emissions picture in the city. We need to lead by example, but we're not going to do it all ourselves. On the other hand, if we don't commit to a target and just say to everybody else who is a part of this, you go do the work, we're not going to adopt a target, that puts us on pretty weak ground to be calling for the city at large to be achieving those 80% reductions that the science tells us we absolutely have to achieve in order to avoid some pretty catastrophic consequences. So in that sense, yes, it's a new target. It doesn't represent a radically more ambitious one, whether it ought to be or not, we won't even get into today. It is really saying the curve that takes you to 80% by 2050 would by 2024 be about here. So given that as members of Carbon 613, we're required to have a short-term target, 20% by 2024 seems like a reasonable one. So that's the context. I did receive a letter, that's my time here, 2 minutes, from Carbon 613 itself, the director of it, who I thought I would just read this to situate it. Carbon 613 and its members are enthused by the movement from the city to set a target and a tangible goal for the reduction of GHGs. Carbon 613 is a local target-based sustainability program to assist Ottawa businesses and organizations set carbon reductions. Having the City of Ottawa commit to a 20% corporate reduction is a great step towards sustainability for the city. I believe this commitment will be transformational to the city as a whole and will create a shift in local organizations and residents' willingness to adapt to changing trends. And I think that's key. Help to create a shift shift in other organizations as well as the City of Ottawa itself. So for that reason, I think that it is something reasonable. It's entirely consistent with targets we've already adopted. But I also understand that the fact that we do not have the data that we were supposed to have by now to tell us where we are at the moment, the kind of basis we would like to have had in order to anchor this target in our current real performance is a weakness and is something we would like to have had. But given that we're already overdue to set this target, and it is aspirational, there isn't a penalty for not meeting it, other than possibly environmental consequences, then setting this target, I believe, is something that sets a fair and honest example to the rest of the city. We're doing our part. We're a key player here, and we will be, and please come along with us. So it's for that reason that it's here and that I support it and hope you will too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question. And I was talking to Mr. Willis, I think, in the last week or so, and I think that you told me that next year you're going to have a review coming forward. It's sort of like the conversation we had the last council meeting or the one before that about waste, and we decided to wait and include it as part of the review that Kevin Wiley was doing with his shop. So, Mr. Willis, you are doing a review next year that would bring back the results on whether or not we're achieving the existing target?
Mr. Mayor, there are two important milestones coming up. In the late fall, we will have the results of the updated baseline inventory of greenhouse gas emissions from the work that we're currently underway, and we are bringing an updated report on the air quality and climate change master plan next year, in the first part of the next term of council.
So I know that politically may not be good timing for what we're hoping to accomplish, but the fact is that those are two big pieces that we are doing. And I'd also say that right now we don't know where the new government is going at all, and that's certainly going to tie into our ability to achieve things. But I would like to have the information on where we are on target with the 12% that we have as a target right now before I start committing us to a 20. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also appreciate the clarification from my colleague, Councillor Sherashenko. We did speak after the item was held and I like his answer as to why he decided to move the targets from 12 to 20. My concern was the report says there's no financial implications. I can't understand how that could happen, and so I'm just curious if Mr. Willis would want to speak to that and assure us that there will absolutely be measures going forward so that we can measure our progress and know for sure that we're getting good value for our money in this.
Mr. Mayor, there is no financial consequences to adopting our target. As Councillor Chernyshchenko had indicated, that is an aspirational target that is an interim step of what Council has already set as a long-term target. There are a number of interim initiatives. Council a few minutes ago adopted additional work on Energy Evolution Phase 1, and we will be reporting on Energy Evolution Phase 2 and the Air Quality Climate Change Master Plan in the next year. And there will be financial implications with those, and they'll be reported at the time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to follow up, actually, from Councillor Harder's question. When we passed in February 2016 a motion establishing our 2050 target of a reduction of 80% of GHG emissions from 2012 levels by 2050, we directed actually Councillor Chernyshchenko to work with the Interdepartmental Working Group on an implementation plan to reach the above stated target. It says in the motion. Is what Mr. Willis just referred to, is that the implementation plan? And if Mr. Willis can remind us of the timing of that, or am I missing something? The implementation plan is coming back to council in the fall of this year, is that right?
Mr. Mayor, What's coming back in the fall this year is the updated count of our existing emissions inventory. We've retained a new consultant to redo the methodology, and we will be reporting that late fall. The two significant pieces that are the implementation plan are Energy Evolution Project. That's one where Council has approved phase 1, and we will be bringing back phase 2 in the next term of Council, as well as the update to the Air Quality and Climate Change Master Plan, which will come forward as well in early next year. There's actually a convergence between the Air Quality and Climate Change Master Plan and Energy Evolution, and if timing works out, we may report them together, but they're both the implementation mechanisms that Councillor Nussbaum is referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on the report, carried. On item 12, dissent by Councillor Harder. Item 12, we have a motion by Councillor Moffat and Leaper, which replaces the one by the committee. So if Councillor Moffat would like to introduce this motion, please.
Thank you. I'll read it in its entirety, just to add context. So whereas Ottawa's special events and festivals industry is vibrant, active, and a significant contributor to economic, social, cultural, and religious fabric in Ottawa, and whereas special events is broadly defined by the special events bylaw to include a fair, a festival, or a social, recreational, educational, community, or similar event, and would include sports events and races. And whereas it is estimated that special events contribute millions of dollars to the local economy and employ hundreds of people, and whereas many special events have adopted sustainable practices to reduce their carbon footprint, to use environmentally friendly products, and to reduce waste, and whereas the public has come to expect recycling and organics collection in public spaces and at special events, and whereas outdoor special events with an expected attendance of at least 500 participants at a given time are encouraged, but not required, to collect recyclable materials and organic waste, and whereas waste from special events that do not recycle or divert organic materials is ultimately sent to landfill facilities with finite and shrinking capacity, and whereas the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change issued a food and organic waste framework on November 16th, 2017, which require all organics be removed from the landfill by 2023, and whereas as part of the source separated organics program update in March 2018, staff indicated they would be working on a plan to address the provincial changes, which will include public and stakeholder consultations to achieve the 2023 goal for no organics in the landfill, and whereas the implementation of any provincial requirements may impose significant cost implications to special events, and whereas many special events would require budget augmentation to address a recycling and organics requirements, and the budget planning cycle takes 1 year at a minimum, which may include grant applications and sponsorship agreements. Therefore, be it resolved that Council direct that emergency and protective services include these special events on public and private property bylaw for consideration as soon as possible as part of the term of council, next term of council's bylaw review work plan. And staff include recycling and organic waste collection in the scope of review for the special events on public and private property bylaw. And 3, Event Central, in partnership with Public Works, Environmental Services, and Recreation, Cultural, and Facility Services Departments, continue to engage with special event organizers to determine what resources may be available to support special events with waste collection, with the aim of having recycling in place in all large special events by 2021 festival season. And 4, city staff continue to work with special event organizers, including but not limited to the Ottawa Festivals Network, the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition, Ottawa Tourism, and their respective members to raise awareness, educate, and encourage the adoption of waste management best practices throughout the special events community. So this motion stems from discussion last week at Environment Committee. I had raised some concerns about the motion, about how it was narrow in focus, how the Festivals Network did come to committee to speak to a review of the entire bylaw, how we look at the entirety of special events, and also the concern that I had with what types of events are we really looking at here with this bylaw. I felt it was too broad. This motion intends to do that fulsome review of the entire special events bylaw, and working with our partners in the industry, Festivals Network, the Music Coalition, as we go forward on that. Now, in discussing it with some of my colleagues, I know Councillor Eglai had spoken to concern with mentioning the 2021 festival season. From what I understand, speaking with staff, they believe it's possible that, of course, under the condition of approval from next term of council, that they could get the bylaw review completed in time, that it could be implemented during the 2020 festival season. So just confirmation that that is possible.
That is correct, Mayor.
All right, so just to add, from Councillor Egli, a friendly amendment that just changes the section item 3. Instead of saying by the 2021 festival season, we change it to during the 2020 festival season. And that allows us to address essentially many of the components that were the key aspect of what Councillor Brockington was bringing forward at committee. But then it also touches on the broad concerns that the industry has that I think that some of the councillors had raised, including myself, and ensuring that we're working with Event Central, working with our partners collaboratively on bringing forward something that can be beneficial to all parties throughout the city. And I think the review of the bylaw too is important, because I think there's some things that we've been adding more impacts to these festivals and small community events for years. And I think taking a wholesome look at it all can give us a better idea of what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and how we can sort of better partner with them to make them more successful. These are huge for us. So we love these things. We promote these incessantly. So make sure that we're helping them and that we're listening to them, I think, is key here.
Great. If I could just offer a comment. First of all, to thank Councillor Brockington for bringing this up, because just as an example, I was at the Dragon Boat Festival. They have a great recycling plan. Everywhere you look, there was capacity for recycling. And then I was at another festival earlier this month where there was absolutely no recycling, and you see hundreds and hundreds of bottles, plastic bottles and Coke cans and so on thrown into the garbage that were just overflowing, that will go right into the landfill. And as you know, when it comes to metal products, we tend to make some money to offset the cost of other recycling. So I think Councillor Brockington is in the right direction, going in the right direction. But I think we could do a better job of consulting with those festivals. Why is one festival able to do it financially and another is not? So I'm going to support the Moffat Leaper motion, because I think it accomplishes in a longer run what Councillor Brockington was looking to do, because we should be, ourselves, quite frankly, should be doing a better job. We do have recycling at beaches, but we don't on all the streets. We have a pilot on Elgin and Laurier, I think, in Sandy Hill, but that has to be expanded. So I would urge members of council to support the Moffat Leaper motion, which is a replacement motion, because it goes about having that discussion, a frank discussion with our festivals, who are great contributors to our economy, but also should be great contributors to our environment as well. So I think it's a good compromise, and I thank all of the people who worked on this collectively. Councillor Fleury, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Moi aussi, je vais appuyer.
I will support that motion, Mr. Mayor. The festival industry was able to share with some members of council on these new measures, so I will also vote.
To some of our key partners in the sector, but we're not looking internally to say, what are we doing here at the city? So I wonder if at the same time, in the same period, we can look at our facilities and our parks and come back with some of the goals. Because I think in some instances, our facilities are offenders of only having one stream, which is the garbage, and not having the other streams. I know that Dan and his team have worked in some community centers to add the other streams, but I think that we can't just look to the festivals to do that. I think we also have to look internally and see what do we have in our facilities and in our parks across the city. So can we, could it be a direction to staff that in the same period we come back with a strategy for ourselves?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we'll take that direction.
Thank you.
Merci. Councillor Egli, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Moffat. We had some good discussions over the last day or so, and thank you to Mr. DeMonte as well. I think the friendly amendment that I suggested and that Scott's accepted to change it to 2020 is a good news story. It does two things. It gets us to the issue of recycling and diversion more quickly, and at the same time, it also gets the bylaw, which everybody wants to have reviewed more quickly done as well. So I think that change is a positive one, and I also, I'm not sure if she's still in the audience. Yes, she's hiding behind the pillar. I want to thank Caroline Pitchinen over the last couple of days too for some very good dialogue on this issue. So I will be supporting the motion as amended, and I hope my colleagues do as well. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry, Councillor, is that... That's it? Okay. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, and I too share Councillor Aguilar's view that you know, this does open the door to being something a little more complete. But that being said, I was supportive of Councillor Brockington's original effort at Environment Committee. The two things I think I would offer for feedback would be, first and foremost, I know we're moving now, thank you to Councillor Moffat, the mover, for moving the bar to 2020. That's inching closer to today. You know, I think it would be nice to, through those discussions between staff and the sector, encourage, where they can, voluntary compliance in 2019. There could be smaller festivals that are capable of doing something in 2019, and I think that would be a good thing to do if they can. And secondly, just for, I guess, a sense of finish, we mention organics throughout the motion, but when we get to the actual therefore be it resolved, we mention recycling, but I don't think we mention organics again, and I think it's implied, but I think it would be important to ensure that when we say recycling, we mean the recycling of organics as well as materials. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I see this as a very complimentary substitute motion. I certainly endorse it and will be voting in favor. I think the date change, as a few speakers have said, is certainly the right thing to do. I mean, this is 2018. It should have, special event should have recycling on site anyway. There's some logistical concerns we heard at committee, and that will come out during the bylaw review. So I see this, like I said, as being quite complimentary, and I will be supporting it. And I just want to make sure that it's item 3, as Councillor Taylor just mentioned, it's recommendation 3, where we'll say the second last line, with the aim of having recycling and organic waste collection in place in all large special events by the 2020 season. So that's where it's going in there. But thank you.
Okay, thank you for initiating this, Councillor. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Thank you very much. Naturally, I support this, and I think it's a great example of collaboration on this council. It was Councillor Brockington who had the original idea, worked with me and with staff to come up with an original draft. We recognized that some consultation with the industry was needed, and did have a meeting with, I believe, 4 players, including Caroline, who's still with us in the audience now. And then later in the game, a number of members of council took on some modifications to it so that it would be a bylaw that had, ultimately there would be a bylaw that had teeth, work towards a deadline that was both achievable but also somewhat ambitious. And I think we have a good result in front of us today. So I just thought that should be recognized.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to remind members, item number 3, we've changed it to events during the 2020 festival season. Agreed on that? Carried? Yes, Councillor Taylor.
Are we also adding in number 3 organics as well as recycling?
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank
Agreed?
you.
Agreed. So on the motion as amended, carried, and then direction to staff from Councillor Fleury that city staff during the same period and timeline as the streams for organics and recycling goals to our Ottawa festivals also be a target for city park and facilities in the 2020 target, that staff come back with implementation plan. So that's a direction to staff that's agreeable. Okay, thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is application to alter the Chateau Laurier Hotel, 1 Rideau Street. Demande de modification de l'hôtel Chateau Laurier, bien fond situé au 1 rue Rideau. On the motion, Councillor Brockington held this.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's Mr. Willis. Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Brockington, you have the floor.
Yep, I just want to make sure Mr. Willis was here. So through you, given that staff's comments on the fourth version was to recommend what was being proposed, the subcommittee has a motion before that was approved by planning yesterday. We heard from Mr. Jeans yesterday that were some options that he wanted the city to consider, that is reinstating the working group, using the UDRP for another review, peer review, other consultation. What will the process look like this time for the next version? We heard staff yesterday state it's coming back in the new year, which is, I still think, fairly quick timelines. What's going to happen between now and then, specifically on peer review consultation?
So, Mayor, the intention would be to begin next week the work on the site plan with the applicant. That will likely be a 6 to 9 month process. During that 6 to 9 months, we will be working very intensely with them and with our urban design review panel. So our urban design review panel is made up of architects, landscape architects, and a heritage architect. They'll be providing feedback on the site plan. It's a public meeting that will be open to the public, expected to be in the winter. And then following that, the site plan will come to Built Heritage Subcommittee for comment and to Planning Committee for approval.
Okay. My other question is this. Right now, it's my understanding or impression that we're looking at an expansion that is modern in nature with heritage components. A lot of the feedback that I've received and others is that there's a preference to have a heritage type expansion with modern components, sort of the opposite that what's been proposed. The motion asks for a meaningful increase. And I just want to have staff's understanding of what exactly does that mean, and how will you assess that specifically when the next version is presented?
So the amended motion, or the amended report rather, at Built Heritage Subcommittee, Mayor, brings forward two specific directions to staff to work on with the architect. One, as the councillor says, is the meaningful increase of the use of limestone, and the second really relates to the architectural expression on the building, particularly on the north facade. So we'll be working with that team and the Urban Design Review Panel over the next year to accomplish those goals. I don't want to commit to a specific proportion of stone on the building, but certainly my interpretation of meaningful is a significant amount of stone on the building.
Thank you. Just given that we're now going back to a fifth version, my expectations is we'll see something quite different than what we've seen so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick clarification. It says in the report about the General Manager of Planning having delegated authority to approve. Will this be going back to Planning Committee after the General Manager has looked at it?
Mr. Mayor, the site plan is going back to Planning Committee, and we will not, as a department, be issuing the modification of the heritage approval until after Planning Committee has ruled on the site plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think there was some misinformation about that. Great. So on the report, I just thank Chair Nussbaum of the subcommittee, and I know Councillor Fleury is the ward councillor, and my office was involved along with Councillor Harder and Tierney from planning, and our staff have worked very hard on this. So thank you for all of your efforts. On the report, carried. Our next item is disposition of items approved by committee under delegated authority. Carried. Received. Motion to adopt reports. Councillor Dean, seconded by Councillor Harder. Motion portant adoption de rapport.
That report from the Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. entitled Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. 2017 Annual Report, Ottawa Board of Health Report 15, Audit Committee Report 16, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 34, Environment and Climate Protection Committee Report 21, Planning Committee Report 65A and 66, Transit Commission Report 19, and the reports from the City Clerk and Solicitor's Office entitled Status Update, Council Inquiries and Motions for the period ending June 22nd, 2018, and summary of oral and written public submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of June 13, 2018 be received and adopted as amended.
On the motion, carried. Motions of which notice have been previously given, and subject, the motion has a new location here. I believe the location. So Councillor McKenney, seconded by Councillor Leeper, on a festival nostalgia.
Festival nostalgia. Yeah, we just added in the location because a few people had asked. Councillor Harder and I are going to go together. That's right. Are they recyclers? They'll be recyclers. So it's just that council declare Festival Nostalgia an event of municipal significance for the purpose of the special occasion permit submitted by the event organizer pursuant to Ontario Regulation 389-91 as amended.
Carried. Thank you. Next motion is moved by myself, signed by Councillor El-Shantiri. Last Monday, Chief Bordelot updated the Ottawa Police Board on a number of recent events in our city. Ongoing investigations have resulted in arrests due to discovery of large quantities of drugs, recovery of stolen property, and the seizing of weapons and gang-related equipment. I'm confident the Ottawa Police Service is deploying the best resources available to fight guns and gangs activity, and in fact, the Chief told me earlier today that they've taken 24 guns off the street this year alone. Je sais que le service de police d'Ottawa prend.
I know that the police service is doing everything to make our community safer.
This is noticeable in every community in Canada. It has become more and more commonplace for our police officers to find illegal handguns and weapons during police investigations. I think we can all agree that we need to support the Ottawa Police Service as it continues to focus on the suppression of gun violence and gang activity in our community. Nous devons continuer nos efforts pour.
We have to pursue our efforts in order to reduce violence.
The report that requested funding for the immediate hiring of 10 new officers devoted to the OPS's guns and gangs effort. This is on top of the 75 new officers we have approved this term of council. And just last week, earlier this year, the federal government announced its application process for new funding of $347.6 million over 5 years to tackle the increase in gun-related violence and gang activities nationwide. Today, Chair El-Shantiri of the OPS Board, Chief Bordelot, and myself had a very good discussion with Ralph Goodale, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Minister Goodale reassured us that cities will have significant flexibility in deciding how new dollars are used for guns and gangs prevention and partnership activities. We're hopeful that this federal initiative will support both enforcement measures and community-led projects involving prevention. Our officers need to stay ahead of the curve and keep a consistent pressure on enforcement to contain crime in Ottawa. And I received a letter from the police board formally requesting funds to expedite the targeted hiring of 10 new officers. I ask that members of council support this motion to strengthen our police force today and when resources are needed. Merci de votre appui à cette motion pour.
Thank you for your support of this motion in order to help our police services.
Said on many occasions, we do live in a safe city. But we have to remain vigilant to ensure that our men and women in uniform have the resources they need to continue their work of suppressing guns and gangs activity in our city. And as I mentioned, that is the motion that's before us, and Councillor Deans has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for bringing this motion forward. Safety in our communities is obviously of utmost importance, and I'm happy to see the recommendation for 10 new direct entry officers on the council agenda today. Recently, there has been a string of violent incidents in my ward and across the city. Last week in my ward, it was a 16-year-old that was shot, and residents, I can tell you, are increasingly becoming concerned about the rise in street crime in our neighborhood. So last week I appeared before the Police Services Board to ask the Chief a simple question, which is this enough? And today, interestingly enough, Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale received a memo noting that Canada's policing strength is lacking behind all other G7 nations. And interestingly enough, I went on the StatsCan website and took a look at our policing numbers compared to other Canadian Canadian cities, and we are on the very low end of the per capita policing. For every 100,000, we have 127 officers, where if you compare to cities like Toronto have 180, Calgary has, I think, 163. We are on the low end. So not only is Canada on the low end in terms of per capita policing, but Ottawa is in the low end of Canadian cities, which does make me wonder if we do have enough policing strength in our community. Having said that, I also very much recognize that policing is only one part of a safe community, and that although we need to adequately resource our police service, including, in my opinion, bringing back more community police officers, I also am a big a proponent of prevention. And for me, this includes initiatives such as the BBRN project, the revitalization of low-income neighborhoods that Council took on this term, and I think that's been very successful and an important piece in prevention in our communities. And we heard through that BBRN exercise that we need more employment opportunities and job fairs, especially in ethnically diverse communities. We need to be providing new opportunities, and I think as a council, we need to focus on things like that. We also need to focus on investments in community-based sports and recreational programs that are affordable for all of our citizens. So, Mr. Mayor, I congratulate you on bringing this motion forward. I think it's a step in the right direction. We all have a responsibility to ensure the safety of our citizens. These new 10 direct entry officers, in my opinion, is one small step in doing just that. Thank you.
Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you very much for the motion. I just had a couple of questions about some of the mechanics and the financial implication. I don't know to whom I should direct those questions, but I'll just raise them now. In terms of the federal funding, do we know yet, or do we have any knowledge of whether salary dollars for police services will be an eligible use of the funds under the federally announced program?
Yes. That was confirmed.
So I understand it's 327 over 5 years and then 100 million ongoing. And so is the commitment from the Government of Canada that if these are salary dollars that are increasing the operational budget, that those would be dollars which would be available ongoing to respond to the ongoing salary pressure of 10 officers who are hired under the auspices of that program?
Yeah, we went through this many years ago when there's a provincial and federal program to hire police officers. The provincial government made it a permanent, so it didn't affect us. The federal government, I believe, was a 5-year commitment, and then we had to take a responsibility. I don't have a specific answer for you. The minister did commit that he would do his best to give us an estimate as to what our share would be based on crime statistics and population by the end of the summer, so we can budget for the 2019 budget.
Yeah, and I noticed too in the police service report that was prepared for its meeting Monday, there was mention of the fact that the board intends to hire up to 30 officers each year for the next 3 years. And what I thought was interesting about that is that, of course, is a bit of an escape valve insofar as if the money doesn't become available, because we don't know yet whether we're going to succeed in the application, then what I'm understanding is that if monies aren't available through the federal government program, the OPS can adjust its hiring targets to absorb the 10 officers for which money is advanced now by reducing, if they need to, the complement of 30 next year. And I think that's important because, of course, for two reasons. One of them is we don't know yet whether we have the money. And the second point why I think that's an important safety valve is that our gang strategy, which we approved and which CPO has been heading up, and as Councillor Deans noted, has 4 pillars. And enforcement and suppression is one of them. I think it's an important pillar. But, of course, there are 3 others that need to be funded and need to be focused on. And I think what's going to be important when we get a sense of the federal dollars next year is to what extent can we ensure that all 4 pillars of our strategy are funded in a way that's cost effective? Because one of the discussions we had at CPS last week was prevention dollars we know are hugely important. That's what all of the research tells us. It's hard to measure, but I think the key thing is that when it comes time to apply and implement the federal funds, we really do need to make sure that all 4 pillars are respected, and then we're going to have a conversation about what that appropriate balance is. And the fact that we have the safety valve of a plan for 30 additional officers and the possibility of absorbing some of the dollars, a portion for those from the 10 new officers, I think is really important in terms of not prejudging how next year we're going to apply the total number of federal dollars in the City of Ottawa. So I'm reassured on that point, and that's all I have to say at this stage. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And I can confirm the Minister did ask a similar question, that it was not just going to suppression, but also to crime prevention, and the Chief and the Chair both answered positively that we have a strategy that's been adopted unanimously by Council, and there are 4 pillars to it, one of them being suppression. The other point, just to clarify, we will be getting dollars. We just don't know how much. We're the 5th largest city. Obviously, we have a challenge with in the last couple of years with the crime severity index going up, and we will be getting dollars. We just don't know what the exact amount is. And the Minister undertook to us in our conversation do his best to get us a specific number. It has to go through, as you know, constitutionally, the dollars will flow through the province, and then the province will flow them back to the municipalities. But it will help us greatly in expanding opportunities from a crime prevention point of view, but also with more officers on the street in the Guns and Gangs unit. So thank you for those. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. It is the timing of that clarification with respect to how much money is going to be made available that's given me a bit of pause this morning. We are spending $300,000 per year on the Time for Change program at CPO. I don't know what the long-term plan is to make sure that that is an ongoing program. It's not insignificant in terms of funding compared to what we are proposing to spend on police here. To Councillor Nussbaum's point, there are 4 pillars in our strategy: neighborhood cohesion, prevention, intervention, enforcement, and suppression. I sit on CPO. It is difficult to measure the return on investment from each of the activities that falls within those 4 pillars. But I don't have an understanding this morning of is the return on investment best in that 4th pillar, or is there a bigger return on investment for smaller investments across the other 3 pillars of our street violence strategy? It is giving me cause for concern this morning that I don't know how much of the future funding that we're going to be getting would be putting toward this, and are we setting ourselves up for an opportunity cost? I am open to hearing views this morning on should we be doing this now, or should we be waiting until we have a better understanding of how much money is going to be coming in overall? Because that opportunity cost, risk of an opportunity cost in terms of not putting money into something that turns out to be more effective than policing at addressing the root causes of street violence and gangs is a concern to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Conseiller Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Je vais continuer un peu.
I'll pursue on this. I have to support the balance that we have to strike in terms of crime prevention and the need for police services, not only in terms of the perception of safety, but also for reinforcement. Looking back, I think there are many factors. There are about 2,000 police officers here in Ottawa, and every time one retires, you have to have one other that comes in because they have to deal with all other components, and also the executive decisions made by Ottawa Police Services. So I've found recently that we don't know police officers individually on the ground. So I have no problem in adding 10 new officers, but I think they should be more proactive. They should be on the ground in the community in order to ensure that they are visible and to have that connection. So I don't know if we have the authority to assign their responsibilities to somewhere specific, but I think we do need to be more proactive in terms of what they do on the ground. So maybe at the end, you can respond to this. There's also the issue of gangs. Street gangs that we observe in the newspapers are between 15 and 35 years of age. I think one target could be that for each dollar that we invest in police services, we should also invest the same in youth. An example, high schools. We have the infrastructure. I think each high school in risk communities should be paid to play basketball or sports, and we should pay for the coordinator. And I don't understand. Yes, we have funds from the federal government, but this would be a good investment to fight against gangs because they end up in vicious circles, they're influenced by their peers because they don't have mentors or role models. We can invest, for example, in Youth Futures. It's a youth program which is extraordinary. They do beautiful work. 700 young people will go from high school to post-secondary education, colleges and universities will benefit. So I'm willing to support police officers, obviously, if we can accomplish more. But on the other hand, for me, gangs, especially the street gangs, it's not officers that can prevent it. They take action at the end of a certain incident. So maybe we could assign their duties to something more proactive in the community. The response is no, because the commission has said that it was for guns and gangs, and that was the motion that was moved by myself and Councillor El Shantiri. As to specific duties, well, by the end of the summer or the fall, maybe we'll have more opportunities to use those funds for other opportunities. But the Board of Directors has said that it's only for guns and gangs.
Community police officers who are being called into guns and gangs to help out. So I don't want to mislead you and say that this is going to do all sorts of things. The motion is specific. It says to deal with the 10 new officers, and a portion of that would be new equipment and a vehicle or a couple vehicles for new officers.
Okay. So I'll be supportive of the motion. I hope that the board continues to pursue conversations with the chief in relations to the overall community relations, proactive responses, and that, you know, as a council, when those dollars do come, that we have an opportunity to look at. Sometimes it's as simple as opening that gym in a high school on a Friday night to ensure that our youth don't get influenced.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. When the dollars come, they don't come to the police department, they come to the city, and then we're responsible for dividing them up, and obviously a portion would go to the police and others would go to CPO. And you know, we did have many years ago a program, a community use of schools program, where that was an option. We opened up gyms and so on, and that slowly got eroded. And I think it's a good idea because I think it worked well. We saw it, I know, in my old provincial riding, Councillor Taylor of Ottawa West Nepean, when we had the Michelle Heights Basketball League up and running in that community. So I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
See. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to support this motion. I'm just not sure it's the complete solution. I'm not sure that continually pouring money into the guns and gang strategy is the total answer. And I've had some good discussions over the last couple of days Councillor Caudry has been helpful in giving better understanding of what Crime Prevention Ottawa is doing and the different things. Councillor El-Shantiri has been very instrumental and helpful in working on a joint initiative between OPS and the faith community in my ward and neighboring wards to bring together potentially a different approach to dealing with the youth and the guns and gangs issue. So I want to thank both of them for that. So I am going to support the motion, but I think we have to open our box of tools and open it wide, and we have to look at what the other options and the other considerations are out there to deal with this problem. So again, I will be supporting it. I think we do need more police. I'm just not sure we need all those police in the guns and gangs unit. I think we have to, again, get back to solid community policing. We've got to get back to police in the schools, more outreach, more education, those things. Guns and gangs is certainly part of the solution, and I don't mean to suggest that it's not, but there are a lot of other pieces to the puzzle, and I think we've moved away from that a little bit in the last couple of years, and I think we have to move back to that, and I think that's a discussion that we're going to have in the upcoming budget as to how we spend those dollars and how we utilize those officers going forward. So again, I will support it, and I think we do need more officers. I'm just a little nervous about how those officers are going to be deployed, and I think we need to have a bigger discussion about that going forward.
Great, thank you. Councillor Brockington, please.
Well, I think some of that apprehension can be, for me at least, explained by we're only dealing with one piece of the puzzle. We're only dealing with the police. And that's not a bad thing, because if there's some time concerns and we want to get the police on board as soon as possible, I certainly support that and support the motion. But a number of colleagues have hit the nail right on the head that there are multiple ways to address the issues in our community, and there will be a much more fulsome discussion when the money arrives in the preventative measures, which I think are just as important as sort of the police component, which is more reactionary. So, Mr. Mayor, just a question for you. I don't want to put you on the spot, but how will the discussion happen when the money comes in from the federal government? How will it be determined where our resources will be going?
Well, primarily through the budget process. As you know, in an election year, the budget process is pushed back into the new year. So we will have, obviously, the exact amount from the federal government. And you may have heard Premier Designate Ford mentioned both Toronto and Ottawa in a media availability, saying that he would be supportive of additional dollars to help with gun crimes in our city. So it will be done through the budget process, and we will have the ability to determine how much we want in prevention and other pillars, and how much will be available for the police, and we'll notify the police through the Police Services Board, and so that they can do it in tandem in their budget at the same time.
That's great. Did Minister Goodell give any indication when the exact amount will be known to the City of Ottawa?
Well, we asked if possible to get it by the end of the summer, and he undertook that he would go back to his staff to see if they could start providing ballpark figures. It still has to go to, I believe, the estimates process in the fall, but I think there's a fair assumption that there's a general understanding of, based on population and crime, how much each major city will receive.
Sure, and you know, acknowledging, as my colleague said, there are many pieces to the puzzle. Police is one of them. I strongly support this initiative. When you look at the statistics alone, are indisputable. The trends of the number of shootings over the number of years is going up. We certainly had a record number of homicides, I believe, next year. We definitely need investment in this particular area, but there's also no dispute that investments, particularly at the preventative front end, community front end, are just and equally important. So I look forward to that discussion later this year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Let me begin by thanking you, Mr. Mayor, for your support, and to my colleague on the support of this item. And just to clarify some of what's been said around the table. First of all, Minister Goodell's article today does not talk about civilian in policing. As you know, in all municipal policing have 2-to-1, 2 police officers and 1 civilian to support the one. So when he talked, Mr. Goodall, he's talking about the RCMP deployment. They don't have as many civilians as we do in the municipal world. And to answer Councillor Dean, who said we are the lowest, what we call police per capita, we're not. We are Durham, Halton, Quebec City, and the city, my colleague who named, they are higher in crime than we are. They have more policing. Yes, Ottawa have 1 police officer for 520 population. Toronto have 351. I can tell you, city of Ottawa a lot safer than Toronto today, unfortunately, and Calgary as well. So alone, just to go by population, I don't think really is what we're looking for here. I mean, I'm the police board chair, and we love for you to give us another 1,000 police officers if you like, and we can have 1 police officer in every corner. Can that stop the crime going in our city? I can assure you not. Because crime is happening in the bathroom, in the restaurants, in different areas, which is we never heard before the crime happened. And then I heard one of my colleagues say, oh, we need foot patrol. Yesterday I was in the market. I saw 3 police officers on a bicycle, cars in every corner of the Byward Market. And these officers on a bicycle, they were engaging with a lot of people, especially the panhandlers. When we talk about we need to invest with youth, and so if you recall last year, we made an investment, or 2 years ago, $400,000 went to Crime Prevention Ottawa to help us with exit strategy and work with John Howard Society. 100,000 of the 400 went to youth coaching in those community, marginalized community Councillor Fleury talked about. And I was hoping he will tell me they're giving a good result because we're hiring good staff, good youth staff in those areas. We have kids of age 14, 15 working for us part-time to keep those kids engaged in basketball and other. And it's clearly, Councillor Fleury can ask staff from Park and Recreation about the 100,000 we invest on this one. Also to my Councillor Eglai, thank you for hard work, and I know this file is close to your heart, but nevertheless, when you talk about police officer in school, we have not changed that model. We still have 58 police officers in school, and once the school is out, those police officers will be transitioned to foot patrol and other area within this city. So folks, when we talk about this number 10, because this number came from the chief, he needs to inject more to the guns and gang, and he needs experienced police officer, not to recruit. In speaking with the minister, and this is not the first time we spoke with the minister, the money is coming to cities and especially those municipalities with high gun violence like Ottawa, Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. Unfortunately, they have not found the model how they're going to spend that money. In the past, some of that money will go to the provincial government, and the provincial government will send it down to municipality. We're hoping this time, and we heard the new premier designate Ford talk about Toronto and Ottawa should receive more money for policing, and we're also working with him on that. So stay tuned. We are working together, and I like the idea when I hear from my colleague. So crime in our city is not just police alone. We cannot do this alone. There's more to do with crime prevention, crime stopper, social housing, and jobs in other areas. So I'm looking for your support. But again, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you personally for leading on this one. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Point of personal privilege.
Mayor, I just ask that if the councillor is going to quote me in future, he quote me accurately, because I never said that the City of Ottawa was the lowest, as he just purported I did. I said we are on the low end according to Stats Canada, and that is a fact.
Okay, thank you. On the motion, carried. The next motion is by myself, seconded by Councillor Harder. I'd like to make a few comments on this important EA study that will help us plan the future of Ottawa's LRT network. As you all know, the south of the city has seen rapid growth over the last 10 years. Comme vous le savez, le sud de la ville est en plein.
As you know, the southern part of the city is increasing.
16 census were in the Barrhaven, as well as the Canada, Stittsville areas of our city. And clearly, Canada, Stittsville, Barrhaven is booming. And along with this growth must come an increase in public services to address the needs of this community, and this, of course, includes transit services. Nous devons continuer à augmenter les...
We have to continue to increase public services for the residents of Barrhaven.
Councillor Harder and I are proposing we take the first step in laying the groundwork to bring LRT to Barrhaven with the full support of Councillor Kakish. Last year, Council directed staff to assess at the earliest opportunity, I believe this was in March of 2017, the feasibility of converting the Barrhaven BRT corridor to the LRT corridor. This conversion would connect the growing community of Barrhaven to the Confederation line through Algonquin College. As we know, Phase 2 brings LRT to Algonquin College in the West End, as well as, of course, Moody Drive and Bayshore Shopping Centre. The motion before us today simply identifies the funds required to launch the EA, which will provide the next council with the facts required to make informed transit planning decisions. The results of the study will feed into the next review of the TMP, the Transportation Master Plan, which will take place in the next term of council. Most importantly, it will enable the city to be ready to benefit from future rounds of federal and provincial transit investments. Ces études importantes nous préparent à profiter.
These reviews will help us benefit from the funding in the future by the two levels of government.
Stittsville EA were received by Council in April 2018, preparing the way to extend the Confederation line to that community. The EA for LRT to Barrhaven will bring this neighborhood on par with Canada and Stittsville, so we can one day bring the O train to these communities. I believe this is a matter of ensuring fairness between Ottawa's fastest growing communities, which is something I've always strived to accomplish. Ceci est une question d'équité.
This is a question of fairness between our communities.
Enthusiasm, and I see this literally every day when I'm out and about around the city for the opening of the Confederation line later this year. We have to ensure that every growth community can benefit from a future extension of Ottawa's LRT network. So let me be very clear. My wish is for the Canada, Stittsville, and Barrhaven extensions of LRT to be done concurrently as Part 3. Just as we are moving forward with Stage 1 and 2 concurrently going west, east, and south, my goal is to have Stage 3 move forward to Barrhaven and Canada, Stittsville at the same time with funding from the provincial and federal governments. And as you recall, we went about asking our two senior levels of government for their support for the extension to Trim Road, which Councillor Manette was very instrumental in, along with Councillor Blais as the chair of OC Transpo, and farther south down to the airport and the EY Centre. With 50-50 funding from the two levels of government, and we secured that, and that's now part of Stage 2. If we have managed to deliver results for the communities of Orleans, Riverside South, and the West End as far as Moody Drive, as part of Stage 2, I firmly believe we can achieve these two extensions at the same time as part of Stage 3. That is my commitment going forward, and it's the outcome I'll be advocating with our funding partners when future rounds of federal and provincial infrastructure funding are announced. Over the last 8 years, time and time again, we have managed to accomplish more as a council when we have united to support not only each other, but progress for our residents across the city. I want to thank Councillor Harder for her leadership and support of this initiative and for her tireless work at City Hall on behalf of the residents of Barrhaven. I also want to thank Councillor Kakish for his strong support for this initiative, as well as the commitment to the Riverside South Town Centre and bringing LRT to his part of the community. And I want to thank our West End councillors, Councillors Hubley, Wilkinson, Caudry, El Shantiri, for their tremendous advocacy on behalf of the West End communities, and Councillor Moffat, who is both a South End and a West End councillor, and of course the chairs of the appropriate committees, Councillor Blais, OC Transpo, and Councillor Eglai, Transportation. This is really an important first step in connecting Barrhaven to LRT and the rest of the O-Train system, and I hope it is one that you will all support. So comments and questions? Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting the motion today. It's important that we look at and support light rail as much as we can as a council. We, as you mentioned, are anxiously anticipating the opening of our first light rail line, and it's going to change the way that people move around this city. Certainly in the downtown, it's an opportunity to encourage people to take transit and not bring their cars into the downtown to relieve some of the congestion. But it's also an affordable and efficient way to move people about. But a couple of questions. I'm just was looking at the transit priority, the Affordable Network Plan, 2031 Affordable Network Plan, and I guess this is for Mr. Manconi. Have we done an EA on each component of that plan to date?
No, there's things such as the Carling LRT that you've not done. I think that's the only one major one that's not done. But there are things outside of the affordability, obviously, that we haven't done either.
And is there a plan for doing an EA on the Carling transit priority?
Well, the current plan is next term of council will bring together for you a strategy on the TMP, and this motion fits in nicely with that. In that, you know, what works well when you bring TMPs forward is that council has a strategy that they'd like to see. We'll bring forward how we're going to bring that TMP to you, the inputs, the evidence approach for prioritizations, the affordability lens, or the strategy to get to the affordability lens, and then we would put in the projects that we would see within that, and then of course council gives us the ultimate direction as what they'd like to see in that affordability piece. What this motion does is it gets you continuous momentum if and when the funding comes into place, so it fits in with the strategy. But affordability is a key driver, and council always overlays their priorities on that.
So just for clarification then, so when we see the next TMP, we will have, even if there's not been an EA done for, say, the Carling Transit Priority Corridor, we will be looking at business cases for each piece and how that should fit into the affordability plan. Is that correct?
We will bring you the list of the projects within the short and the long term, and then we will obviously seek your direction on what the focus and the approach to the TMP should be.
But again, just so that I'm clear, because it'll be my first TMP is on this side. It will demonstrate each corridor and the business case for each. Is that? Am I correct in that?
I'm getting caught up on the word business case, so there will not be an EA on everything,
okay.
But Ms. Chi and the team will bring you the overall network plan. You'll see how all those fit into that. What we have to bring to you is a draft framework as how you would like to prioritize the projects and the sequencing of those projects. And that is the difficult part of the TMP discussion, especially with the evolving transit and transportation trends, your strong focus in the last 2 terms of council of prioritization of all modes and so forth. So yeah, we'll bring you the big picture, and you're going to give us the direction and the focus on how you want to proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will also be supporting this motion. I'm a firm believer in a fully connected city, so this is another step of the way for us to have public transit throughout our city, and hope that in the next term of council we can be successful in finding the funding to do what, in your words, phase 3 will be Stittsville, Canada, and Barrhaven. The question I have for staff is, as we asked in the Canada EA, will staff be able to ensure that they are also looking at new and emerging technologies that are, quite frankly, a lot of it's coming right out of the Canada businesses that will probably make this a cheaper experience than, say, phase 1 was?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, not only will we do that, but we'll also be bringing forward a strategy on how we do a look ahead on emerging technologies, both short-term and long-term, so that we don't lock ourselves into technologies that cannot be adapted, even if some of those technologies, such as autonomous vehicles and so forth, aren't ready.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Manconi.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Hubley, that's a good point, and it ties in nicely with the work that Councillor Harder is doing on autonomous vehicles and the research park being the site for testing those right in our own backyard. So it's, and ironically, it's right along the pathway of where the LRT would go into Barrhaven. Conseiller Fleury is not here. Okay. Councillor Caudry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I too will be supporting this motion, feeling the fact that it is important, as Councillor Hughley just mentioned, about connectivity across the city. And I do want to thank Karen McCrimmon from a year ago for getting the funding for Canada-Stittsville EA, and that has been completed. The thing, though, the thing going forward is, as you mentioned, that both projects should be done, cooperatively and follow each other, or would be at the simultaneous time with each other. And I know it all depends on funding, and that's responsibility, Mr. Mayor, that you have to take on to make sure that we get the funding as a 50-50 basis, or even better formula somehow compared to what other cities are receiving from the provincial government currently. I want to make sure that the statements or comments that were previously out in the media that one area between Barrhaven or Canada-Stittsville is going to take priority. I just want to assure with your comments this afternoon, Mr. Mayor, that that's not going to happen. And that is the thing, a comforting message for the residents, both Canada and Stittsville, as well as obviously Barrhaven. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the comments. Let me provide. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Caudry. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too fully support that. We do need to have these EAs done on the show so that when we get funding, we can move forward with it. And I applaud you for putting forward that you've been working with the other levels of government to make sure this could happen faster, because the problem is that people are already there, the businesses are already there, and we're having both Canada and the Barrhaven are having serious traffic issues because of that. And we really need this to help to alleviate that. So anything we can do to assist you in that, whether I'm on council or off council, I'm glad to help with it, because I think this is a really important community building exercise for all of our communities, and we do need to tie it all together. So I applaud you for bringing it forward, and to Councillor Harder, and we will put them there as two partners in a very needed project. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Harder, any comments? It's the seconder.
No, I don't. Just say thank you very much, everybody, for your support.
Great. So on the motion, it's presented. Carried. Thank you. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Caudry, with respect to a no stopping issue. There's a safety component to this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So on suspension, carried.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the motion is fairly self-explanatory. I'm willing to provide details if members of council. It's 1:45, so I'm just cognizant of the time.
Okay, on the motion, carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Hughley. This is on this issue of people parking in parks and so on. So we have to suspend the rules of procedure. My understanding was there some desire, Councillor Eglai, to forward this to Transportation Committee?
That's the intention, yes. I think that's where we can have a fulsome discussion.
Yeah, but I think it also gives an interim, which I believe you're uncomfortable with.
The concern about the interim is, my understanding is that essentially what we would be doing is we would be amending or changing zoning, even on an interim basis, but we're essentially would be doing it on the fly. I'm not sure that's good policy making. I'm fully supportive of this matter coming to committee for a proper and discussion of the issue. I'm just not, I'm not sure that we should be, as Councillor Brockton pointed out, it's almost 2 o'clock and this is the last piece, and I'm just not sure we should be discussing policy and zoning changes at the last minute on something which is desirable. I understand that to certain individuals, but is not it's not an emergency.
So we have to suspend the rules in order to have this discussion. Is there support to suspend it, or do people want to see this go back to committee? So does anyone want to move a motion to suspend the rules? Councillor Hugh.
Mr. Mayor, I will. With the idea that I think we could call this a pilot project for the summer while they study this. It's Councillor Wilkinson has pointed out a problem that probably exists elsewhere in the city. We should figure out how we can do this to help. So right. I get Councillor Aglai's concerns. I just think we could do the solution that Mr. Chenier put forward.
On suspension, carried. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with that this is a pilot because I think we have to take a really hard look at it, and I have indicated that. I've talked to staff about it. They're willing to do a trial. And I will say that if a trial points out that we shouldn't be doing this, then this will be suspended as a temporary measure. But I think we have a very strong policies in this city to try to encourage people to use cycling. And when you have to cycle 30 kilometers to get somewhere to get to work, it's a rather long trip. If you can go part way and park and then cycle, that reduces the congestion in the more central areas where we have congestion. And people get exercise. It is really kind of almost a recreation program. We could take it that way. But this, it is difficult. We do parking rides for cars to go on transit, but we don't do them for people on cycling that may not have the same distances involved. So I would strongly encourage Council to say, let's try this out. I'll look forward to the committee dealing with it. It may take several committees because there may be zoning inquired as well, but we can get it started there and come up with whether or not it's a good thing to do and how we should deal with it, not just for this one area, but I'm concerned with the people from other areas outside the Greenbelt that also have these very long commute areas where they'd like to do cycling would be interested in doing that. And I might say, people say put them on the buses, but not all the buses that come to my area have racks for cycling, particularly the ones in the local communities. And that's been, they found that very difficult to handle, which is why they have been doing this informally for 5 years already. And it's a case of saying, let's try to make sure if they are going to do it, that we do it legally. But in the meantime, let them continue until we get that done. And that's basically what this motion says. I've confirmed that with Rick O'Connor. He thinks this is the right way to go. And John Chenier is willing to do it as a pilot, but not to say it's permanent until we get the rest of it done. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess, you know, the challenge I have with this, we now have 3 more speakers to this. This has implications for insurance, zoning. These people are not using the bus system. We're providing a free parking spot. I'm going to move that the whole issue be referred to the Transportation Committee and staff can give a proper report and the public can comment. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Moffat. So on referral, carried. Okay. I understand your point, Councillor, but I think bringing something this complex at the last minute is not all that helpful. Okay, notice of the motion for consideration at subsequent meetings. Councillor Chernyshenko has some exciting news to share, seconded by myself, with respect to naming of the footbridge linking 5th Avenue and Clay. Councillor Chernyshenko.
Thank you very much. Given that I didn't want it to be rushed on, it is a notice of motion. Yesterday I complained of my head hurting from banging it against walls. Today I'm feeling much better. Thank you very much. And I've got good news. I sent out some photos from construction of our bridge yesterday of the V piers going in, and Councillor Kadri said, well, clearly the name has to have V's in it if it's got V piers, and I tantalized even further by saying no V's in it, so you can probably guess it now. No, he couldn't yet. So we're tired of calling it the bridge, the footbridge, the 5th and Clegg Bridge, the Canal Bridge. We want to give it a real name. So whereas the City of Ottawa, in collaboration with the Government of Canada and the Province of Ontario, are constructing a vital pedestrian and cycling footbridge across the Rideau Canal between 5th Avenue in the Glebe and Clegg Street in Old Ottawa East. And whereas the Ward Councillor completed a public naming process that included a general call-out via online form and through direct contact with the Councillor's office, whereas 141 suggestions were submitted by the public, resulting in 86 unique suggestions and a short list of 70 submissions adhering to the City's commemorative naming guidelines, and whereas a naming committee was created to review all submissions comprising of myself, the Councillor, 1 board member each from 3 neighbouring community associations, 1 non-board member of each of those neighbourhoods, and a representative of the Mayor's office. Whereas the naming committee shortened the list to 6 names, which were vetted by City for clarity and duplication, resulting in the removal of 1. Whereas the naming committee recommended that the Rideau Canal footbridge be named Pastel Flora Footbridge, after Flora MacDonald, a pioneering female Canadian politician and the first female Canadian foreign minister, a humanitarian at home and abroad, and a bridge builder between political parties and cultures. Whereas Flora MacDonald lived for several decades, actually 40 years, adjacent to the bridge site and was a frequent speed skater on the Rideau Canal, therefore be it resolved that City Council approved that the Rideau Canal footbridge linking 5th Avenue and Clegg Street, that it be named Passerelle Flora Footbridge.
Great, thank you, and we'll have a
It's a notice of motion. There you
discussion
go.
about that next council. Next is a notice of motion by myself, seconded by Councillor McKenney. Whereas City Council May 10th, 2017, as part of the approval of the Elgin Street Renewal Project, directed staff work to provide opportunities for additional temporary public parking within close vicinity of Elgin Street during the construction, and delegated the GM of Public Works and Environmental Services designate dates and times when parking at City Hall will be free of charge during the time Elgin is under construction. It goes on to explain, therefore be it resolved that City Council approve that free parking at the City Hall garage located at 110 Laurier be provided during weekday evenings after 6 p.m. and on weekends beginning on July 14th, continue until completion of the major construction work on Elgin Street as described in this motion. That's to help the merchants and visitors to Elgin Street. Are there any other notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meeting? No. Notice of intent from the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation to hold the annual general meeting of the shareholder at City Council meeting July 11th, 2018. Motion to introduce bylaws. Motion portant présentation de règlement. Conseiller Deans, appuyé par Conseiller Harder, s'il vous plaît.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws 3 readings be read and passed, and that the rules be waived to permit the listing of a bylaw entitled A Bylaw of the City of Ottawa to amend bylaw number 2008-250 to change the zoning of the lands known municipally as 1569-1573 La Pierre Street.
Carried. Adopté. Confirmation bylaw, please. Councillor Deans and Harder.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of council meeting of June 27th, 2018.
Carried. We have no written inquiries. Just to remind members of the public, many of our council colleagues were out promoting free bus service for Canada Day, courtesy of OC Transpo, and we thank Mr. Manconi and his staff. There's a shuttle service between various attractions, but free service the entire day, and we encourage people to take OC Transpo. Certainement, c'est une bonne idée d'utiliser le transport.
It would be a good idea to use the bus on July 1st.
Mr. Deans, please.
That the proceedings of the City Council meeting of June 27th, 2018 be adjourned.
Carried. Happy Canada Day. Bonne fête Canada.